There are towns in the American West where one person becomes the measure of everything else. Not because they seek it, not because they perform it, but because something about them, some quality of warmth or steadiness or simple, undeniable presence, makes everyone in a 50-mile radius quietly aware of where they are in a room. In Stonebridge, Wyoming, in the summer of 1883, that person was Clara Whitfield. She was 26 years old, the eldest daughter of the town's general store owner, with golden hair she kept pinned during the day and eyes that were either green or gray depending on the light. She was warm without being soft, funny without being unkind, and capable in the particular way of frontier women who have never had the luxury of being otherwise. Every eligible man in Stonebridge County had considered the question of Clara Whitfield. Most of them had done more than consider. There had been formal courtships, flowers left at the counter, invitations to dances and Sunday suppers. A cattle rancher from Ironwood had reportedly offered her father a sum that made Samuel Whitfield set down his coffee very carefully before responding. Clara had declined all of them, politely, warmly, with the kind of genuine kindness that made the rejection worse, because there was no coldness in it to be angry about. People had theories. She was too particular. She was waiting for someone from the city. She had taken some private vow. None of them were right. The answer was considerably simpler, and considerably more inconvenient. And it had a name. The name was Nathaniel Cross. And he was the only man in Stonebridge who had never once thought to try. What no one knew, not even Nathaniel, was that time was beginning to run out. Nathaniel Cross was 30 years old and ran the livery stable on the south end of Stonebridge's Main Street. He was not the most prosperous man in town, not the most handsome, though he was not unhandsome, with a carpenter's square, hands always slightly rough from the work, and a smile that arrived slowly and then stayed. Other men described him as solid, which is either a compliment or a polite way of saying unremarkable, depending on who's saying it. What Nathaniel Cross was without question was good. Not in the performed way, in the quiet way. He remembered things people told him. He gave honest prices. When old Pete Doran's barn burned 2 winters ago, Nathaniel showed up the next morning with lumber he couldn't really spare, and never mentioned it. He and Clara had grown up 3 streets apart. They had the easy, unexamined familiarity of people who have always simply been part of each other's landscape. He looked at Clara the way you look at the mountains outside your window. Aware that they're extraordinary, grateful they're there, and somehow never quite registering that you could walk toward them. He came into the general store on a Wednesday morning in June for nails and rope and found her reorganizing the dry goods shelf, standing on a step stool, reaching for the high shelves with total concentration. "Morning, Clara," he said, the way he'd said it 1,000 times. "Morning, Nathaniel," she said, the way she'd answered 1,000 times. He paid for his nails and rope. He left. Outside on the boardwalk, Henry Doyle, refused by Clara twice and philosophical about it by now, looked at Nathaniel and shook his head slowly. "You know," Henry said, "for a man who works with horses, you have a remarkable inability to see what's standing right in front of you." Nathaniel looked at him with genuine puzzlement. "What are you talking about?" Henry looked at the sky. "Nothing," he said. "Absolutely nothing." But he was thinking about something Nathaniel didn't know yet, that Charles Denning, the most prosperous rancher in the county, had been asking quiet questions about Clara Whitfield for the past 2 weeks. Serious questions, the kind a man asks before he makes a formal offer. The Stonebridge Midsummer Dance was held in the barn behind the feed store on the 3rd Friday of July. Clara did not particularly want to go, but her mother had spent 3 days on her dress, and her father had already told half the town she'd be there. So she went, in the pale cream dress with the lace collar, her hair properly done, with the composure of a woman who has learned to be graceful about things she didn't choose. The offers to dance came within minutes. She accepted some because it would be unkind not to, and moved through the evening with the warm, genuine attention she gave everything. Charles Denning arrived an hour in. He was 42, broad-shouldered, with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being the most consequential person in any room he entered. He had built the largest cattle operation in the county from nothing, which commanded respect even from people who didn't particularly like him. He asked Clara to dance. She accepted because refusing would have caused a scene, and Clara did not cause scenes. He was a good dancer. He was also, she noticed, watching her with the careful, evaluating attention of a man making a decision. Not unkind, just deliberate. The kind of man who, once he decided something, did not undecide it. Across the room, Nathaniel arrived late, still slightly dusty from the stable, and accepted a cup from the refreshment table, and leaned against the wall in the comfortable way of a man happy to watch the world. He saw Clara dancing with Denning, thought vaguely that she looked like she was being patient. She caught his eye across the room, smiled, not the public smile she'd been wearing all evening, but the other one, quick and private, just for him, gone before anyone could catalog it. He smiled back. Then Sam Porter appeared at his elbow, wanting to discuss a horse trade, and Nathaniel turned his attention elsewhere with the oblivious ease of a man who has no idea what he just missed. Across the room, Clara watched him turn away. Then she looked back at Charles Denning, who was watching her with that careful, deliberate attention, and she felt, for the first time, something she had not allowed herself to feel before. The first cold edge of the possibility that waiting might cost her more than she had planned. 3 days after the dance, Samuel Whitfield sat on the porch while Clara hung laundry in the yard and said, "Charles Denning came in yesterday." Clara kept hanging laundry. "He comes in most weeks, not to buy anything." Samuel paused. "He asked about you. How you were keeping. Whether you had any particular attachments." Another pause. The kind of questions a man asks before he makes a formal offer. Clara's hand slowed on the sheet she was pinning. "He's a serious man," Samuel said carefully. "Good standing. The Denning operation is the most stable in the county." He was quiet for a moment. "I told him you made your own decisions, which is true." He looked at his daughter. "I just thought you should know." Clara finished pinning the sheet. She picked up the next one. "Papa," she said, "do you know why I've said no to every man who's asked? I have a theory. It involves Nathaniel Cross." "It does." She was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't see it. I've waited 2 years for him to see it, and she stopped, started again. "He looks at me the way he looks at the mountains. Like something beautiful that he never thinks he could actually have." Samuel was quiet. "Charles Denning is a good man," Clara said. "And if Nathaniel doesn't?" She stopped again. "How long will you wait?" her father asked gently. She looked at the mountains beyond the town, those mountains Nathaniel never thought to walk toward. "Not much longer," she said quietly. And for the first time, she meant it. Henry Doyle found Nathaniel at the livery on a Monday morning and told him directly, "Charles Denning is going to make a formal offer for Clara Whitfield, probably within the month." Nathaniel was checking a horse's shoe. He didn't look up immediately. "Where did you hear that?" "From Samuel Whitfield's clerk, who heard it from Denning's foreman, who has no reason to make things up." Henry leaned against the stable wall. "I'm telling you because you're my friend, and because you are, I say this with affection, occasionally the least self-aware man I have ever met." Nathaniel set down the horse's hoof. He straightened. "What does that have to do with me?" Henry looked at him with the particular patience of a man who has been waiting a long time to have a conversation. "Nathaniel," he said, "do you understand that Clara Whitfield has declined every man who has asked her for 6 years, and that there is a reason for that, and that the reason is currently standing in a livery stable pretending not to understand what I'm talking about?" The stable was quiet. A horse shifted in the next stall. Nathaniel looked at Henry for a long moment. "She'd never," he started. "She has been," Henry said simply. "For years." And Charles Denning doesn't know that, and if you wait much longer, she's going to have to make a different kind of decision. He pushed off from the wall. I've said what I came to say. He left. Nathaniel stood in the stable for a long time after, with the specific stillness of a man whose entire understanding of something has just rearranged itself. Charles Denning. A month. The shoe he'd been holding was still in his hand. He set it down carefully, like a man who has suddenly remembered that some things, if you wait too long, stop being available. It happened 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon in August. Clara was walking back up the main street when she passed the livery. Nathaniel was outside working on harness leather, sleeves rolled up, hat pushed back. She stopped, because she always stopped, because any time with him was better than none. They talked. The heat, the Henderson horse, the late summer rains. Then Nathaniel set down the harness leather and looked at her. Really looked, the way he occasionally did when he forgot to be casual about it. And something moved across his face that she hadn't seen before. Not quite recognition, something more urgent than that. He took a breath. Then, before whatever courage had arrived could leave again, he said. And he didn't make it a joke this time, didn't soften it into self-deprecation. Clara, I heard about Denning. She went still. I have no right to say anything about it, he said. I know that. I've had no right for a long time, because I never said what I should have said. He looked at his hands, then back at her. But I need to tell you something before you make any decisions. I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't, because I convinced myself it was impossible. And I was wrong about that. The street was warm and dusty. Someone was hammering down the block. She waited. I love you, he said. I think I have for years, without knowing it. And I know that might not change anything. But I couldn't let Denning, he stopped. I couldn't let you think nobody saw you, because I see you. I just was slow to know what I was looking at. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she took one step closer and said, low enough for only him, Nathaniel, I've been saving my heart for you for years. I just needed you to show up. She held his gaze long enough for the words to land, not long enough for her courage to fail. Then she said, quieter still, don't make me wait anymore. And Nathaniel Cross, who had never once thought he could walk toward the mountains, took a step forward. He went to the store the next morning. Good shirt, combed hair, the particular expression of a man who has made a decision and is done deliberating. Samuel was behind the counter. He looked at Nathaniel, the shirt, the hair, the expression, and said nothing. Simply called toward the back, Clara, Nathaniel Cross is here. Footsteps. Then she came through the door and stopped. And the look she gave him was clear and direct and without any of the careful patience she'd been carrying for years. Just, you're here. I'd like to come calling on you properly, Nathaniel said. Starting today. And I'd like your father's permission. Samuel, behind the counter, found something extremely interesting to examine on the shelf behind him. You have it, he said to the shelf. Clara looked at Nathaniel. Something in her had settled, the long-held breath finally released. You know, she said, most men who come calling bring flowers. He looked at his empty hands. I'll bring them tomorrow. Is there going to be a tomorrow? Every day, he said. For as long as you'll have me. She looked at him for one moment more. Then she smiled. The real one. His one. The one he understood now had always been waiting for him to recognize it. Then you'd better not be late, she said. What followed was the most discussed courtship in Stonebridge's recent history. He brought wildflowers the next day, not bought, just noticed and picked, and she put them in a jar on the store counter without explaining them to anyone, which caused considerable speculation. He came to Tuesday's supper at the Whitfields'. Margaret had set the best table since Christmas. Samuel was warm. Clara sat across from Nathaniel, and they talked the way they always had, easily, with the dry humor that had always been between them, except now neither of them was pretending it was merely neighborly. On a Sunday in September, they rode to the ridge above the valley, where you could see the whole county spread below, mountains behind, golden grass ahead. They sat in the late afternoon light and talked about real things. "Why me?" he asked, genuinely. "There were better prospects." "Because you never performed anything," she said. "Every other man who came was showing me something. His land, his money, his standing. You just showed up the same every time." She looked at the valley. "I always knew exactly who you were. That's rarer than people think." He was quiet. Then he said, "Denning is a good man." "He is. You could have lost me, Nathaniel." She turned to look at him directly. "I waited for you not because I had no other choice, but because you were the choice." A pause. "Don't make me explain that twice." He looked at her, at this woman who had held something quietly for years and offered it to him without conditions, and felt the specific gratitude of a man who understands fully what almost didn't happen. The valley was gold below them. The mountains were doing what they always did. And something that had been patient for a very long time sat down beside him on that ridge and stopped waiting. October in Wyoming arrives without negotiation. The cold comes fast, the light sharpens, and the mountains show their first snow on the high peaks while the valley grass goes from gold to brown. He asked her on an October evening outside the general store after the harvest social. He had his grandmother's ring in his breast pocket, a simple gold band he'd cleaned carefully and carried for 2 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt honest rather than staged. He stopped at the store steps and turned to her. "Clara," he said, "I need to say something plainly, because I've been unclear for long enough, and you deserve better than that." She looked at him, those eyes green tonight in the cold October light. "I love you," he said. "I think I have for years, which I know is not a point in my favor, but I know it now clearly, the way I know the things I'm most certain of. And I would like very much for you to be my wife." A pause. "If you're willing to take on a man who was slow and is trying to make up for lost time." Clara looked at him. "Nathaniel Cross," she said, "you are the least romantic man in Wyoming." "I know." That proposal was approximately half as poetic as the occasion called for. "I know that, too." A pause. The cold wind moved through the empty street. "Then, yes," she said simply. Finally, after years of patience, the word that had always been waiting. "Yes." He put the ring on her finger on the store steps in the October air, and she looked at it the way you look at something you recognize. Not new, but finally completely yours. They were married in November, before the first hard snow. The church was full. Half of Stonebridge felt, with some justification, that they had personally invested in this outcome and had earned their place at the celebration. Henry Doyle, in the third pew, was observed to be unusually moved for a man who claimed no feelings about romantic matters. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, taken in at the waist. She walked toward Nathaniel with the unhurried certainty of a woman arriving somewhere she had always been headed. Nathaniel stood at the front of the church and watched her come and felt, with sudden complete clarity, how close he had come to missing this. How a man could stand next to something extraordinary for years and fail to see it. How Charles Denning had almost made the offer. How another week of his own blindness might have changed everything. He was not going to waste another day of it. They said their vows simply. They meant every word. The years that followed were good ones, built from honest work and the warmth of two people who genuinely liked each other and never stopped being glad to come home. The livery grew. Clara kept the accounts and discovered within the first year that Nathaniel had been undercharging for his work, which she corrected with the brisk efficiency of someone who grew up in commerce. He didn't argue. He had learned quickly that on matters of numbers and cents, Clara was simply right. Their son arrived in the second year. They named him Edmund, for Nathaniel's grandfather, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's patient, deliberate way of moving through the world. Their daughter came in the fourth year. They named her Grace, quick and bright and funny in the dry way that Clara had always been, which made the house considerably louder and considerably more alive. On a summer evening in their sixth year, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when Nathaniel came home from the livery, still dusty, and stopped at the gate to watch her. She was humming. She always hummed at the repetitive work. And the Wyoming evening light was gold, the way it gets in July, and the mountains were doing what they always did. Nathaniel stood at his own gate and looked at his wife. She noticed him, turned. "You're staring," she said. "I know. You used to never stare." "I used to not know what I was looking at," he said. "I've corrected that." She smiled. "The real one. His." He came through the gate and crossed the yard and took the laundry basket from her hands and set it down and held her in the gold evening light. She rested her head against his chest. The children's voices came from inside the house, Edmund and Grace arguing about something with the passionate conviction of children who have inherited stubbornness from both sides. And Nathaniel Cross held his wife in the evening light and thought about Charles Denning, and about Henry's voice in the stable that Monday morning, and about how close it had all come to going differently. He was grateful in the way you're only grateful when you understand what almost didn't happen. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I see you," he said quietly. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. She had always known. She'd just been waiting for him to say it. Years later, when Grace was old enough to ask, she asked her mother how she had known. They were in the kitchen, Clara teaching Grace to make the pie that had become something of a family institution. And the question came sideways, in the middle of something else entirely. "How did you know Papa was the one?" "Before he knew." Clara was quiet a moment, working the dough. "He never performed anything," she said finally. "Every man who came along was showing me something. Your father just showed up the same every time." A pause. "And he was worth waiting for." Grace considered this. "But you almost didn't wait." "Because of Mr. Denning." Clara looked at her daughter, Nathaniel's eyes in her face. "Yes," she said honestly. "Almost." She handed Grace the rolling pin. "That's the part one want you to remember. Not the happy ending, the almost." She looked at her. "Know what you want. Don't perform for anyone. And if the person you're waiting for is slow, give him time, but not forever." A pause. "At some point, you say the true thing. You give him the chance to show up. What if he doesn't?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Then you know, and you move forward." She covered her daughter's hands with hers on the rolling pin. "But Grace, in my experience, when you say the true thing to the right person," she smiled, "they show up." Clara waited. But she didn't wait passively. She lived fully. She showed up every day as exactly herself, without performing, without shrinking. And when the moment came, when she understood that time was no longer on her side, she said the true thing on a dusty street and walked away without waiting for his reaction. That is not a small act. That took more courage than anything Nathaniel did. And Nathaniel isn't a villain. He's something more recognizable. A man so convinced that something wonderful was beyond his reach that he never reached, until the morning Henry Doyle told him about Charles Denning. Until the moment the clock that had been running quietly became suddenly, undeniably audible. Sometimes we need that. Sometimes the thing that makes us finally move is not the presence of love, we already had that, but the understanding that love, like everything worth having, is not guaranteed to wait forever. They chose each other deliberately, at the last possible moment, but still in time. That's the part worth holding on to.